All right, we are now to introductions and conclusions. If you have been following along, we have talked about brainstorming. We have talked about coming up with a thesis, doing an outline, writing your paragraphs. And now we're to the introduction and conclusion. And it seems kind of weird putting this at the end, especially when it's introduction. But as you'll see here, you usually write your introduction when you're done writing your body paragraphs, so that way you know exactly what you wrote about and you can tie in your introduction to your body paragraphs nicely, and then you conclude with your conclusion, just so that way, again, you know what you said, you know how you wrote in the introduction, and so you can write the conclusion a little bit differently, and it all works out. So, let's talk about this. So let's start with the introductions. Like I just said, work on the essay first, write your thesis statement first, then do your essay, then come back and do the introduction. Okay. I think a lot of students just kind of write it in the order that it's supposed to be done in, and when that happens, that usually ends up with a very disjointed essay, because usually you don't find your footing until you get into your body paragraphs, and then your introduction isn't matched up to it, and you don't go back and edit it because you don't want to, and editing and revising are super hard things to do, and so you just say screw it and turn it in, and then you get the grade that you get. So when you are writing introductions, please wait until the end of writing the paper, kind of a deal. The reason that an introduction is super important is because it is the first impression for your reader, for your audience. When I say essay here, it can be written, it can be verbal, it can be any kind of those things. You still need to have a good introduction. The introduction is normally 1 to 2 paragraphs. Usually it's one, especially for like a lower high school level kind of a deal. Once you get maybe upper high school and into your college level stuff, it can become more than 1 paragraph depending on how broad the scope of your paper is and all those kind of things. Okay? So, the introduction is supposed to do about 3 things. One, hook a reader, grab their attention. We're going to talk about ways to do that here. 2, introduce your subject, summarize it. Don't go into a whole lot of detail, especially if that detail is going to be in your essay. Just introduce us with it, tease us with it, and summarize just a little bit, just enough to give us some background information that we would need to understand the rest of your paper as a whole. And then 3, present your thesis statement. And again, as we talked about, that usually goes last um, in your introduction. Is usually the last sentence, or somewhere in the bottom of it. Most teachers like it when you do the last sentence, because then that's just like, oh, there it is. There we go. I will say that probably the hardest part of writing an introduction is not the attention getter. It's not the thesis statement. It's that kind of weird part in the middle. And so I'm going to kind of show you not show you, but give you some different examples of ways that you can kind of get to that and kind of pave your way through it. So, introduction types. So, the first one here is broad to narrow. So, start with a more vague, broad topic. And I will say before I keep going here that all these different types can be combined. You don't need to do just one. As you'll see here later on, you can actually start with a different one and then do this. This broad to narrow is kind of the universal one that should be done somewhere in your introduction. So you start with a more vague, broad topic that matches your paper and it matches the topic. And then as you keep writing your introduction, you kind of narrow it down to what your paper actually is about. And the example that I always use for this is The American Dream for Great Gatsby. As a junior, you'll probably read The Great Gatsby with me, and you'll write a paper about it and about the American Dream, about what the authors are saying about the American Dream. Well, the broader topic is the American Dream, but you could write a lot of different essays, a lot of different papers about the American Dream. There have been books written about it and how it's changed over the course of the years. And so you are just kind of introducing the topic American Dream. And as you keep going through it, you then narrow it down to, The Great Gatsby, the book The Great Gatsby. And so maybe it's someone talking about how the American Dream has changed and evolved over the course of years and years and years. And one of the reasons that it keeps changing is because of the media and how the media defines the term American Dream through books and movies and blah blah blah. And then one book that talks about or discusses the American Dream is The Great Gatsby. I went from a broad American Dream for everyone, and then I talked about how it got influenced, and I talked about the TV, and I talked about books, and I talked about Great Gatsby. I narrowed it down. You know, what's the word I'm looking for? I whittled it down to The Great Gatsby. You might go the opposite way and talk about The Great Gatsby and how it's a book about love and romance, blah, blah, blah. But then it's also about the American Dream. And then go that route. Both those ways go broad to narrow. It goes a broad topic, American Dream or The Great Gatsby as a whole, and narrows it down to American Dream and The Great Gatsby. So that is broad to narrow. A lot of introductions use this. There's not a lot of great ways to do it, like an attention getter for this one, or a hook to get your reader involved, and that's why most people use some of the other ones that are going to be on here. Okay, so the next one here is a brief anecdote, which is a story. Start with a story. It ties into what you want to talk about. Politicians, public speakers, ministers, priests, they use this a lot to get you in because, one, it makes them more relatable. It makes you, as a writer, more relatable if you're using a story. Whether it's true or not, that doesn't really matter. It just makes it more believable and it gets their attention. And you just kind of want to know, okay, where's the story going? Why are they telling me this story? What's the big deal? Okay? So, my example down there at the bottom is Danny Steinwant, if you know her, for a speech. She wrote a story about, not a story, I'm sorry, a speech about how we need to save the bees, and here's all the reasons why. And so, how she starts off is you're walking into a grocery store, you grab your cart, and you go down the first aisle, and it is stocked wall to wall with Velveeta cheese. And you think this is pretty good, right? You think, and so you grab a box because you want to make nachos, and you go down the second aisle, and it's more Velveeta cheese. Oh, okay, that's weird. It's a lot of Velveeta cheese, and you keep going down the rows, and with the exception of one aisle, that is the Twinkie aisle, the entire store is filled with Velveeta cheese. Doesn't sound so good anymore, does it? Well, that could be our reality if the bee becomes extinct. She took this kind of story, started with a feel good, kind of went kind of down a bad road, and then boom, nails us with the transition to the bees. And it's like, oh, that is perfect, kind of a deal. And then she went from broad to narrow. She talked about bees as a general and what they do and how they do, those kind of things. Very briefly, couple sentences, kind of a deal. And then she gave her thesis about how there are many ways that you can, at home, help save the bees, blah, 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 kind of a deal. So that was a great way, not a real story, it was a fake narrative, but it was still a story, to get us into this and make us care. She did a very good job with it. Next one is a rhetorical question. This is supposed to be a question that gets the readers to think, but you guys have abused this so much. I think you are taught, start with a question. And you do stuff like, have you ever wondered, or did you know? Don't do that. Don't do that. It comes across as very fake. It comes across as if you're forced to write that question in there, kind of a deal, which for the most part you probably are. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so use it. Don't use it unless you absolutely, positively have to, or you have a good question that will get the reader to think. And that's what you want to do. Okay, so please do not overuse this one. You guys do this already. I cannot stress that enough. Don't do it, okay? And the next one here is a quote. A lot of times people start with quotes and then they just kind of let it lie there. Again, you need to transition from the quote to the topic at hand and then go broad and narrow kind of a deal. That's the key here is that kind of transition. We call it the glue that goes from your attention getter to your thesis statement. How are you going to weave your way through this introduction to get there? That is the hardest part of writing an introduction is doing that. The next one here is a refutation of a common belief. If you refute something, you disprove it, or you go against a common belief. So, example here. In school, we are made to believe that everyone loved. Sorry, I forgot the word in there. Everyone loved George Washington when he was president. However, that is not the case. And then you can talk about how he was trying to be assassinated. Actually, one of his bodyguards, I don't think they called him Secret Service then, but someone who was in that kind of a role was going to poison George Washington by putting poison in his peas, which is a kind of startling, fact or whatever if you want to call it that too. But I just thought that, and then I don't know what the rest of that essay is, but that's a common belief that I think that we could, talk about and all that good stuff. So that's a refutation of a common belief. And then a dramatic stat or fact. Now, the key word there is dramatic because any one little fact doesn't work for this. It has to be a mind-blowing, oh my God, I can't believe that that's true kind of a deal. Make me go and look it up kind of a thing. Also, it has to tie into your thesis statement or it has to tie into whatever you are talking about. But sometimes the best facts are the ones where the audience and the reader can't figure it out. Much like that Velveeta cheese story, there's a transition there, but you don't associate bees with Velveeta cheese or with Twinkies or whatever it is, and so that's kind of the reason why it works so well is because it's like, oh, okay, got it. So my example here is when I was in high school, I wrote about um, segregation during the civil rights, where black and white people had to go into different restaurants, had to different seats, those kind of deals. So I started with a startling fact that I didn't I probably did, but looking back I shouldn't have probably started with a did you know? I just made myself puke. But something along the lines of the Pentagon has 284 bathrooms, which is double the amount that they actually need. That gets the reader thinking, wait, okay, why do they have that many bathrooms? Then you bring in, so the Pentagon was built in the 1940s when segregation laws were rampant in the United States. And so it just takes the fact that it's like, okay, how am I going to go from bathrooms to segregation? Like, that seems like a big stretch, but with a good transition and good glue in there, it works out pretty well. Okay? So, those are your different introduction types. Let's talk about conclusions. Much like an introduction, a conclusion, a strong one is very, very important because it's the last impression that you get onto a reader. In court cases, those final arguments are the biggest parts of the case because it's that lasting thing for the jurors. In debate, the conclusion is usually pretty important because you want to remind people, hey, remember I said this? Remember I said this? Remember I said this? Vote for me kind of a deal. A conclusion should also give off a feeling of completeness and finality. I have read so many papers where it just kind of ends, and it's just like, okay. And this is usually a good place to remind people of your thesis and your arguments. Now, here is kind of the way that is I don't want to call it basic, but this is a common way of doing it. If your thesis statement up at the top is, we need to do this because of reason 1, 2, and 3, in your conclusion, you just kind of flip it around. Reasons 1, 2, and 3 are why we need to blah, blah, blah. So that's just kind of how a very simple way to do that, especially in the beginning part of the conclusion, that very first sentence, and then you can talk about some of the rest of the things here that I will go through. One of the other things also is don't say in conclusion. Don't use those kind of words, okay? Because we know it's a conclusion because it's the last paragraph or last couple of paragraphs kind of a deal. Don't use them. You don't need them, okay? They are crutches. Don't use a crutch here. You can walk. Please walk when you're writing these essays, not at the same time. Okay, so here's a couple different ones. This one's a very, very simple one, just kind of summarizing your ideas. This one is a good one if you're trying to explain something, if it's a little confusing, if you just want to remind people, hey, this is what I said, kind of a deal. This is a good one to use. It's summary. So just kind of giving your thesis statement, giving your reasons, and then just kind of going through each reason, just a quick little recap about what you said. This one is a prediction one. So this is like an argument one. So this is like if you are going to be talking about we need to do something. And if we don't, here's what's going to happen. Or if we do this, here's what's going to happen kind of a deal. So it's just kind of given a best case, worst case scenario, and you can use that to your advantage. If you're talking about how we need to strengthen gun laws or unstrengthen gun laws, what's going to happen if we do, if we don't, kind of a deal. Next one is a question. Again, you present all your information, and then you give the audience a question to think about as you're done. I call this the Allstate commercial effect. Have you ever seen an Allstate commercial and it's got the black guy with the really deep voice in it, and he's talking, and then he ends it with, "Are you in good hands?" And it cuts to black, and it's just like, am I in good hands? I don't know. It makes you think. It makes an audience think. That's what a good question is supposed to do there. Okay. Stats. This one's not used as much because you want to put your most important information into your essay. But there are times or occasions where maybe you save it for the end, so just that way, just that way you can, in fact, drive a point home. Maybe it didn't fit very well into the rest of your essay. Maybe you just need to kind of add a little oomph to your conclusion. But make sure that that stat fits with your essay. Okay. And then this one is probably one of the more common ones as well. A call to action. You have persuaded your audience about something. You have argued your point, and they're on board with you. Now what? Maybe it's go vote. Maybe it's call your school board. Maybe it's write to your editor. Maybe it's go buy shampoo or whatever it is. A call to action tells the reader to go do something, tells your audience to go do something. In commercials, at the very end, they usually tell you, call this number, go to this website, here's where we're located, stop on in, join us, kind of a deal. That's a call to action. You can use those to your advantage because hopefully by the end of your essay or your speech or whatever it is, they're on board with you. And that's what you want. Okay? And so with that, how to write an essay. The basics, some of the stuff that you will need to learn, you can't really do until you're writing an essay. And what works for one person isn't going to work for another one. So I hope that you at least take this kind of basic information, make it your own, and then learn and grow as you keep writing, okay? Too often do I tell students and give lessons to students about how to do something, and I never see improvement. The whole point of writing is to practice, to get better, to improve. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.